everyone. Welcome back to Lit Talk with Lisa. I'm so glad you're here with me today. Seriously, it always feels like I'm sitting down with friends when I hit record, so thank you for tuning in. Grab your coffee, your tea, or whatever you love to sip on, because this episode is going to feel like one of those long, cozy conversations you never want to end. So let me just dive into something real quick. A couple of years ago, I remember sitting in my small apartment, and it was one of those nights where rent was coming up, my bills were stacked on the counter, and my brain was just doing that spiral thing, where you're like, okay, how on earth do I break this cycle of living paycheck to paycheck? Am I doing something wrong? Is everyone else secretly better at adulting than me? Laugh softly. Like, I'm sure you've had those moments too, right? It's that weird mix of stress and, I don't know, self-doubt. And then, funny enough, I stumbled across this book sitting on a friend's shelf. The title instantly pulled me in. Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. I remember thinking, okay, what kind of book has the audacity to call itself that? Like, what's the deal here? Two dads? And honestly, the curiosity alone made me crack it open. What I didn't expect was how the ideas inside would hit me in such a real, almost uncomfortable way. Not uncomfortable in the bad sense. More like when someone tells you a truth you've kinda known deep down but never wanted to say out loud. And here's the thing. The book doesn't just throw financial advice at you like some stiff lecture. No, it actually tells a story. A story about growing up with two father figures, two completely different ways of thinking about money, success, and life. And honestly, it made me stop and think about my own money beliefs. Like, where did they even come from? From my family? From school? From those little throwaway phrases adults say when you're a kid, like, money doesn't grow on trees. Or, just get a good job and you'll be fine. It's wild how much those little lines shape the way we think about money. And by extension, about freedom and choices. Now, I don't want to spoil everything because we're going to take our sweet time peeling back these layers in this series. But let me tell you this. Rich Dad, Poor Dad isn't really about how much money you have in your pocket. It's more about the way you see money, the mindset you carry around it. And that mindset is what actually changes your financial reality. Think about it. We're living in a time where job markets are unpredictable, technology is changing the way we work every single year, and the old advice of just work hard and save your money doesn't really cut it anymore. Like, I'm not saying hard work isn't valuable, it totally is. But if hard work alone guaranteed wealth, wouldn't every construction worker, every single mom juggling 3 jobs, every teacher staying up till midnight grading papers already be wealthy? And yet, they're not. And that's the gut punch Kiyosaki throws at us. It's not just about hard work, it's about smart work. It's about understanding the rules of money the way the wealthy understand them. And here's where it gets interesting. Because the wealthy aren't necessarily the smartest people in the room, right? They're not always the ones with the highest grades or the fanciest degrees. Sometimes they're the ones who just learned how to see opportunities differently. They don't see money as this scary, scarce thing. They see it as a tool. And tools are meant to be learned, mastered, and used. I'll be honest, when I first read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, it kind of messed with my head. I was like, wait, so everything I've been taught about money, going to school, getting a good job, saving for retirement, that's not the only way? Maybe not even the best way. It shook me. And at the same time, it gave me this weird sense of relief. Like, maybe I wasn't broken, maybe I wasn't bad at life, maybe I just didn't have the right mental framework. And let's be real for a second. Money is one of those topics we don't really talk about openly, right? Like, we'll gossip about relationships, we'll chat endlessly about TV shows, we'll even dive into deep personal stuff with our close friends. But money? That's hush-hush. Almost taboo. And that's why this book matters today, maybe more than when it was first written. Because the world has gotten even more money-driven, but most of us are still operating on the same old scripts we inherited. What I love about Rich Dad, Poor Dad is that it challenges that script. It forces us to ask, am I living someone else's definition of financial success? Am I stuck in a cycle because I only know one way to think about money? And more importantly, what would happen if I learned a new way? And look, I'm not here to say this book is the Holy Grail or that it has all the answers neatly wrapped in a bow, but it does have questions, powerful questions. The kind that make you sit back and reconsider your path. The kind that might sting a little, but also open doors in your brain you didn't even know were there. So today, as we kick off our deep dive into Rich Dad, Poor Dad, I want you to think of this episode less like a lecture and more like story time mixed with a heart-to-heart. I'm not just going to throw theories at you. I want to share how these ideas can show up in everyday life, why they matter, and how they can start shifting the way you think, even in small, practical ways. And hey, if you're listening right now and you're thinking, I'm not a business person. I don't want to be some investor or whatever. I just want to live comfortably. I hear you. That's actually the beauty of this book. It's not about turning everyone into some Wall Street type. It's about giving you the tools to live on your terms, to feel a little more in control instead of always chasing. I'll share one last little story before we move forward. This happened not long after I finished the book for the first time. I was standing in line at a coffee shop listening to two people chat, and one of them said, "Ugh, I hate money. It's always the problem." And it just made me pause, because I realized before reading Kiyosaki's ideas, I probably would have nodded along. I mean, who hasn't said, "I hate money" in frustration? But after the book, I caught myself thinking, what if money isn't the problem? What if my relationship with money is the problem? That small mental flip, it doesn't solve your bills overnight, but it does start to shift the power dynamic. Suddenly, you're not the victim in your own financial story. You're the author. And that's what I want us to explore together in this series. How do we rewrite the story? How do we go from fear and frustration to curiosity and maybe even empowerment when it comes to money? So stay with me, because in the next part, we're going to unpack some of the core ideas behind Rich Dad, Poor Dad in a way that feels real and practical. No jargon, no intimidating finance speak, just relatable insights and some stories that will hopefully spark something in you the way they sparked something in me. All right. Take a deep breath. Maybe grab a notebook if you're the kind of person who likes to jot things down, because we're about to head into the heart of it. But not just yet. I want to leave you right here on this little cliffhanger so you're ready for what's coming next. We're going to talk about what it really means to have a rich mindset versus a poor mindset. And trust me, it's not about the numbers in your bank account. It's something way deeper and way more exciting. All right, so let's lean right into this. Remember how I mentioned that whole idea of mindset being more important than the actual dollars in your bank account? This is where things start to get really interesting, because one of the first big lessons Robert Kiyosaki talks about in Rich Dad, Poor Dad is this contrast between the way the rich dad and the poor dad thought about work and money. And honestly, it's kind of a gut check. Here's the basic idea, and I'll put it in everyday language. The poor dad believed in trading time for money. You know, go to school, get good grades, land a secure job, and then, well, you work your whole life collecting a paycheck. That was his security blanket. And maybe you're nodding along right now, like, yeah, Lisa, that's literally what I was taught too. Because same. I mean, how many of us grew up with that exact blueprint drilled into our heads? But the rich dad? Oh man, his mindset flipped that whole script. He saw money not as something you trade hours for, but as something you put to work for you. He believed in owning systems, creating assets, building things that would keep generating income even when you weren't physically clocked in. And that, right there, is one of the hardest but most powerful shifts to wrap your head around. Let me make it a little more personal. Back when I was in college, I worked at this little clothing store. It wasn't glamorous. Folding jeans, cleaning out fitting rooms, listening to the same 3 songs on loop for 8-hour shifts. And the paycheck? Well, it covered my groceries and like maybe 2 nights out with friends if I budgeted carefully. But here's what sticks with me. No matter how hard I worked, no matter how many extra hours I picked up, the ceiling was already set. $10 an hour. That was it. I could double my energy, smile till my cheeks hurt, upsell accessories to every single customer. Didn't matter. The cap was built in. That's the poor dad way of life. It's safe, sure, but it's limited. You're always stuck in that equation. Hours worked equals dollars earned. And the scary part? If something happens to your ability to trade those hours, like you get sick or you burn out or, I don't know, a global pandemic shuts everything down, then poof, your income stops. Now compare that with this other mindset. Imagine instead of working at that store, I had put that same energy into, say, starting a little online shop, selling something I actually cared about. At first, yeah, maybe it wouldn't have made much. Maybe it would have been slower than my hourly paycheck. But over time, if I kept at it, that little shop could have started making sales while I was sleeping, while I was in class, while I was binge watching Netflix. That's the difference. That's the shift from working for money to letting money, or systems you create, work for you. Kiyosaki's rich dad used to say, "The poor and the middle class work for money. The rich make money work for them." And I remember when I first read that line, I actually rolled my eyes. Like, come on, it sounds so cliche, right? But the more I thought about it, the more it kind of gnawed at me. Because I realized that deep down, I was living exactly the way the poor dad thought. Play it safe, cling to that paycheck, be grateful you even have a job. And look, there's nothing wrong with having a job. The point isn't that jobs are bad. The point is, if your only plan is to trade your time for money, then you'll never break free of that cycle. Let me throw in a little analogy here, because this one really helped me see it. Imagine money is like seeds. If you spend your whole life eating your seeds, like literally just grinding them down, paycheck to paycheck, you'll never have a garden. You'll never grow more than what you're handed. But if you start planting some of those seeds, even if it's just a few at first, eventually you've got fruit. You've got vegetables. You've got trees that keep producing more seeds on their own. That's the rich dad way of thinking. And once I framed it that way, I couldn't unsee it. And here's where it gets real, because I know some of you might be thinking, okay, Lisa, that's nice in theory, but not everyone has money lying around to plant as seeds. Some of us barely make it to the end of the month. And that's true. That's real life. But here's the twist. The mindset shift doesn't start when you have money. It actually starts when you decide to see money differently, no matter how little you have. Even if you've got just a sliver of wiggle room in your budget, you can choose to spend it in a way that builds something for your future, instead of just consuming it. Let me give you an example that hit me hard. A friend of mine used to spend like $150 a month on eating out. Nothing crazy, just a few takeout meals here and there. When he read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, he decided to redirect half of that into buying used books about investing and online courses. That doesn't sound flashy, right? But a year later, he started a little side hustle teaching music online because guess what? He had invested in himself, in his skills, instead of just, tacos and lattes. And now that side hustle makes him way more than those courses ever cost him. That's what planting seeds looks like in real life. Another piece of this lesson that I think is super important is the whole idea of fear and comfort zones. The poor dad thinking clings to safety. He was all about get a job with benefits, stick it out till retirement, don't rock the boat. And honestly, I get it. That sounds comforting. But Rich Dad? He believed that comfort was actually dangerous. Because comfort keeps you from taking the kinds of risks that lead to growth. Like, let's be real. The first time you try something outside that paycheck comfort zone, it's scary. You might fail, you might lose a little money, you might feel embarrassed. But Rich Dad's point is that those little failures teach you way more than a lifetime of playing it safe. And isn't that true of everything? Like, think about learning to ride a bike. You didn't nail it on the first try. You scraped your knees, you fell over, you probably cried a little. But if you had quit after that first fall, you'd never have felt the freedom of riding down the street with the wind in your face. Money, business, investing, it's the same principle. I'll share one of my own embarrassing stories here. After reading this book, I got super inspired and decided, okay, I'm going to start investing. And I dove in headfirst without really knowing what I was doing. Spoiler alert, I lost a couple $100 on some sketchy stock that tanked. It stung. Big time. But here's the thing. That little failure taught me way more about risk and research than any lecture could have, and it lit this fire in me to learn properly. If I'd let that loss scare me back into my shell, I would have stayed stuck in paycheck only thinking forever. And maybe that's the real takeaway here. Rich Dad wanted to teach his kids to not fear money, but to learn from it. To treat money like a teacher, not an enemy. Every dollar you lose, every mistake you make, it's a lesson, if you're willing to see it that way. So, as we sit with this first big idea, I want you to ask yourself a kind of uncomfortable question. Are you working for money, or is your money working for you? Like, take a real honest look. Because if the answer feels a little painful right now, like, oh no, Lisa, I'm definitely just working for money, that's okay. Awareness is the first step. You can't shift what you don't even see. And don't worry, we're not going to leave it at just think differently. In the next part, we're going to get into some really practical ways this mindset plays out, specifically around the whole concept of assets versus liabilities. And trust me, once you get that distinction, it's like someone hands you a pair of glasses and suddenly you can see your financial life in a totally different way. So let's hold that thought for a second. Sit with the idea that maybe your time and your money could be working in a different relationship than they are right now. And when we come back, we'll dig into how you can start spotting the difference between something that puts money into your pocket and something that quietly takes it out. That's where the real shift starts to take shape. So here's where things start to get really juicy. After that whole shift of not just working for money, but letting money work for you, the very next thing that Robert Kiyosaki dives into is this distinction that honestly should be taught in every single high school, but somehow it isn't. And that's the difference between assets and liabilities. And let me just pause here because, oh my gosh, when I first read this, I was like, wait, this is it? This is the thing that nobody explained to me in all those years of school. It's so simple, and yet it changes everything once it clicks. Okay, let's strip it down. Rich Dad's definition was super straightforward. Assets put money into your pocket. Liabilities take money out of your pocket. That's it. Not complicated. But here's where the twist comes in. Most of us grow up being told that certain things are assets, when in practice, they're actually liabilities. And this one little misunderstanding is what keeps so many people stuck financially. For example, let's talk about houses. How many times have you heard people say your house is your biggest asset? It's practically like this cultural mantra, right? Buy a house, settle down, that's how you build wealth. But Rich Dad would shake his head and say, no, no, no. Unless it's putting money in your pocket, it's not an asset. And when you think about it, that hits. Because what does a house actually do for most people? It drains money every month. Mortgage payments, property taxes, insurance, repairs, maintenance, that new water heater that breaks at the worst possible time. Laughs. Like, I've had friends who bought their first home and within 6 months were like, oh, no, this just is just a giant hungry baby that keeps eating all my money. So the house you live in, unless you're renting part of it out or generating income from it somehow, it's actually a liability. Mind blown, right? Because that's the exact opposite of what most of us are told. Now let me make it relatable with a little analogy. Imagine your wallet is a little bucket. Assets are like tiny faucets dripping money into your bucket, steady, consistent, even when you're not actively doing anything. Liabilities, they're holes in the bottom of the bucket, slowly leaking your money away. If your life is filled with holes, car loans, credit card debt, expensive houses, gadgets that depreciate the second you buy them, you can be working your tail off pouring water into that bucket, but it'll never feel full. And the craziest part? Sometimes people mistake those holes for faucets. They'll say, oh, this fancy car, that's an asset. But no, if it's draining money through payments, insurance, and repairs, that's a hole. I remember when this clicked for me, I had this moment of quiet panic. Like, I looked around at all the stuff I owned, the shiny TV, the furniture I bought on a store credit plan, even my car, and I thought, oh no, I've built my life around liabilities, not assets. It was a little depressing at first, but then it actually became empowering. Because once you see the truth, you can start shifting it. You can start asking yourself, okay, how do I start plugging these holes and adding more faucets? And here's the thing. Assets don't have to be these huge, intimidating investments like million-dollar real estate properties or giant companies. They can start small. A savings account that actually pays you interest? That's technically an asset. Buying a few shares of a company that pays dividends? Asset. Creating an online course that you sell on repeat without extra effort? Asset. Even writing a book, like Kiyosaki did, that keeps generating royalties year after year? Yup. Asset. It's not about how big they are, it's about the direction of the money flow. Now, let me tell you a story about a friend of mine who totally shifted my perspective on this. She was a teacher, not making a ton of money, but she was super intentional. Instead of buying a new car when she got her first real job, she kept her old beater and started using that money to buy a small rental property with her brother. At first, it was a headache, dealing with tenants, fixing leaky faucets, learning about property taxes. But guess what? That little rental started putting a couple $100s a month into her pocket, even after expenses. And then, a year later, she bought another. Fast forward 5 years, and she had 3 rentals that basically covered her entire mortgage payment for the house she lived in. That's the asset liability lesson in action. Contrast that with another friend, and maybe you know someone like this, who got a big promotion, immediately bought a brand new luxury car, upgraded to a bigger house, and filled it with expensive furniture. On the outside, it looked like success, but month after month, all his money was flowing out in payments. He had shiny things, sure, but he was constantly stressed about money. That's the trap Rich Dad wanted us to see. And I think what makes this lesson so powerful is that it's not about how much money you make. It's about where that money goes once it comes in. Like if you earn $2,000 a month and spend $1,900 on liabilities, you're stuck. But if you earn the same $2,000 and start shifting even a small chunk into assets, you're planting seeds that can eventually change your whole life. Let me put it another way. Think of assets as employees you hire with your money. Each dollar you invest in an asset is like hiring a little worker whose job is to bring back more dollars to you. Liabilities, on the other hand, are like expensive pets. They're cute at first, that shiny car smell, that new gadget glow, but then they just keep eating, and they never bring anything back. You want more little workers, more pets that drain you. I'll be honest though, this isn't always easy in practice because the world around us constantly markets liabilities as if they're assets. You'll see ads saying, "Own your dream home, it's the best investment you can make." Or, "Drive this car, it holds its value." Spoiler alert, it doesn't laughs. Cars are basically like melting ice cubes in terms of value. The second you drive it off the lot, it's shrinking. So, the hard part isn't just understanding the lesson. It's unlearning all the noise around us and being able to look at every purchase with fresh eyes. Here's a practical little challenge that might make this lesson stick. Next time you're about to buy something big, a phone, a car, even fancy shoes, pause for just a second and ask yourself, is this going to put money in my pocket or take money out? And hey, sometimes you'll still choose the liability, and that's okay. Life isn't about cutting out all fun or living like a monk. But being conscious of the choice changes the game. It turns mindless spending into intentional decision-making. And I think that's why Rich Dad was so insistent on teaching this to kids early. He wanted them to have that filter built in from the start, so every decision would naturally lean toward building assets. Because over time, assets compound. They stack on top of each other until one day, you wake up and realize your bucket is overflowing. Not because you're working harder, but because you've built this quiet little army of workers bringing money back to you. When I think about this lesson today, I realize it's not even just about money. It's kind of a metaphor for energy too. Like, think about your relationships. Do you have people in your life who are like assets? They fill you up, encourage you, bring joy. And then do you have relationships that are liabilities? Constantly draining, leaving you exhausted? Same principle. The things we invest in, whether time or money, either grow us or drain us. And being aware of that difference is one of the most empowering shifts we can make. So, as you sit with this idea of assets versus liabilities, just start noticing. Notice where your money flows. Notice what's feeding you versus draining you. Even jot it down if you're a notebook person. The awareness alone starts rewiring the way you see the world. And when we keep going, we're going to dive into the next layer of this lesson. How to actually build up those assets when you feel like you don't even have extra money to start with. Because that's the big question, right? Knowing the difference is one thing, but building that portfolio, even in small ways, is where the transformation really begins. The more I sit with all of this, the more I realize that the magic of Rich Dad, Poor Dad isn't really in the technical advice or some rigid step-by-step plan. It's in the way it flips that mental switch. Like, once you see the world through the lens Kiyosaki is offering, you honestly can't unsee it. It's like when someone finally explains the plot twist in a movie you've watched a dozen times, and suddenly every little detail you missed before just clicks. And here's what's wild. The lessons aren't complicated. They're not wrapped up in complicated financial jargon or charts you need a degree to decode. They're almost deceptively simple. Work to learn, not just to earn. Make money work for you instead of trading hours forever. Understand the difference between assets and liabilities. Simple. But simple doesn't mean easy. Simple means clear. And the hard part is choosing to actually live differently once you understand it. I'll be real with you, when I first finished this book, I felt a weird mix of inspired and, honestly, a little annoyed. Inspired because I was like, yes, this makes so much sense. I can do this. But annoyed because I couldn't believe no one had ever taught me this sooner. Like, why did I spend 12 years of school memorizing equations and essays but not once learn how to make money work for me? It felt unfair. But then that's the point, right? Rich Dad was teaching his son things that most schools never cover. And that difference in education, not just formal education, but financial education, is what separates one mindset from another. And if I think about it, that's probably the deepest takeaway here. It's not about who's smarter, who's luckier, or who's born into privilege. Sure, those things play a role. But the game changer? It's knowledge. It's education of a different kind. Not the degrees hanging on your wall, but the way you understand money and choices and risks. And the truth is, that kind of education is accessible to all of us if we're willing to learn and unlearn at the same time. I remember after I read the book, I started seeing little opportunities everywhere. Nothing huge, nothing flashy, just small shifts. Like, instead of spending my tax return on a vacation, I used it to build a little side hustle. Instead of upgrading my phone every single year, I kept the old one and put that money into a savings account that earned a bit of interest. These weren't life-changing moves overnight, but slowly, they started to compound. And more importantly, they made me feel in control. Less like money was this scary monster chasing me, and more like it was a tool I could pick up and use. And you know what? That's what I hope you take from all this. Not that you suddenly have to sell everything and start investing in some complicated stock portfolio tomorrow. No, 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 no. I hope what you walk away with is the thought that maybe, just maybe, you can start to see money differently. That maybe you have more power over your financial story than you realized. That maybe building freedom isn't about winning the lottery or getting some huge promotion, but about tiny, consistent choices that add up over time. It's almost like health, right? If you eat one salad, nothing changes. If you eat one donut, nothing changes. But if you eat a salad every day for 6 months or a donut every day for 6 months, oh, you'll feel the difference. Money works the same way. Assets and liabilities, habits and mindsets, they stack, they compound. And before you know it, your choices have either built a cage or a runway. I also want to be really honest here because I think sometimes these conversations about wealth and mindset can feel a little overwhelming. Like, well, Lisa, that's great for people who already have money, but what about me? I'm struggling just to pay rent. And to that, I just want to say, I hear you. I really do. This isn't about pretending everyone has the same starting line. It's not about denying how hard it can be. But what I've taken from this book is that no matter where you start, you can begin to shift the way you see money. And even the smallest shifts matter. Even deciding to learn, to pay attention, to question the old scripts, that matters. That's planting seeds for a different future. And maybe you're listening right now and you're already feeling that little spark like, oh, wow, I've been living in liability land and didn't even realize it. Or, oh, I've been working my whole life for money instead of letting money work for me. If that's you, let that spark grow. Write it down. Talk about it with a friend. Revisit these lessons. Because the more you engage with them, the more they start to shape the way you live. I think one of the coolest parts of this whole journey is realizing that wealth isn't just about money. It's about freedom. It's about having choices. It's about not being trapped by fear or by a paycheck or by what you were told you should do. And once you connect with that, money becomes less of this taboo subject and more of a language you can learn. A language that, once you're fluent, gives you the power to write your own story. And look, I don't want you to think I've got it all figured out. I'm still learning. I'm still making mistakes. I still catch myself sometimes falling back into poor dad thinking, stressing about security, clinging to comfort zones. But the difference now is that I notice it. I catch it. And then I can choose differently. And honestly, that's the real win. Not perfection, but awareness. Not instant wealth, but progress. So as we close out this conversation, I just want you to ask yourself, what's one small step you can take this week to move toward that rich mindset? Maybe it's reading more about assets. Maybe it's rethinking one purchase. Maybe it's just sitting down with your own thoughts and writing out what money beliefs you've been carrying around since childhood. Whatever it is, start small. Start somewhere. Because those small moves, they're the beginning of something bigger. And above all, be kind to yourself in the process. This isn't about shame or blame. It's not about beating yourself up for past mistakes. It's about learning, growing, and giving yourself the chance to do better moving forward. All right, my friends, this has been such a meaningful conversation for me to share with you. I can't tell you how grateful I am that you've joined me, sat with me, thought through these ideas with me. You make this space so special, and I never take that for granted. So thank you from the bottom of my heart for tuning in today. Thank you for listening, for reflecting, and for being open to the kind of growth that can truly change your life. Take care of yourselves, keep that spark alive, and remember, you've got the power to write your own financial story. I'll see you soon, and until then, this is Lisa, signing off from Lit Talk with Lisa.